Hi, everyone. My name is Anna, and welcome to today's message. The Great Pretender from Matthew 7:15. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. I'm going to share with you today an incredible true story. In 1973, 8 perfectly healthy people walked into a psychiatric hospital, and not one of them needed placement. Not one person inside realized it, but this was no accident. This was an experiment designed by a psychologist named David Rosenhall. He wanted to know if a professional could tell the difference between a psychologically ill person or not. He wondered if they could truly tell who was suffering from mental illness. So he recruited each person, very ordinary people, a housewife, a pediatrician, a student, a painter, and even another psychologist. Each person told the center that they heard voices and their lives felt hollow and empty. Nothing else. No other behaviors, just that they heard voices, and each became an admitted patient. Once admitted, they acted perfectly normal. They were cooperative. They had good behavior. They even asked to be discharged. And each thing they did was noted as a psychological behavior, an obsessive neediness, or attention seeking. When they were polite, it was said that they were controlled, had schizophrenia, or manic depression. And on average, they were inside for about 19 days, with one person being in for 52. And each day, the truth being documented in their chart, they were being labeled, and no matter what they said, it did not matter. But then something incredible happened. When the psychologist publicized all this, the psychiatric world blew up, and it was challenged by another hospital to send new patients, confident that they could identify them. So Rosenhan agreed. And over the next several months, 41 people were identified as imposters. But the truth is that no imposters had been sent, not a single one. And while the normal and undisturbed experimented patients were original inpatients, it was the actual real patients who approached them and saying that they didn't belong there and identified them as being different from the others. The conclusion, it was unavoidable, and it proved his point. There is blind trust in how people are diagnosed, and it was unsettling. And once labeled as crazy by those who believed they could not possibly be wrong, it was offensive to their education and their lack of discernment. And once it was shown that staff to patient contact was minimal and patients had been dehumanized, and even though they reported that they had stopped hearing voices and were released, they were still released with the diagnosis of remission, still a mental disorder. Some with paranoid schizophrenia. And despite the experiment showing objectivity, psychiatric labels, lack of care, the power of context, shaped perception, and sparked multiple debates, it continues to be studied because it proved one thing. There are limits to professional judgment and social context to mental health labels. They were conditioned to be sick. Now, you might wonder why I shared this with you today. Well, because it challenged the validity of those psychiatric diagnoses. And it worked. It proved the point that this psychologist had been trying to prove for decades. Nobody really understood what it was like to be insane, and they couldn't reliably distinguish the sane from the insane. And the fake mental health patients could fool the doctors. Not because they were good at faking the illness, but because no matter what they said, the staff continued to believe their diagnosis was correct. Because of their own lack of observation and reporting, which caused an error. It was that their own discernment was inaccurate. They assumed the diagnosis was right and worked backward from there. They assumed that these people were disturbed simply because they were there. And not one of them considered the lack of mental health circumstances in their lives. And it was the perception of the staff that shaped the diagnosis. The key word here is perception. They stuck to that diagnosis despite the patients having normal behavior. But the actual patients knew better. In fact, 35 out of 118 accused the normal people of being normal in front of staff. So it made me wonder, who really were the abnormal ones? The actual crazy patients who identified them as normal, or the doctors who diagnosed them all as crazy but were wrong? At no time during the experiment did anyone except actual mental health patients question why they were there. No one identified it in medical records, and nobody even said that potentially they were not mentally ill. And when they were discharged, noted as being in remission, the diagnosis stuck. Proof that humans, even when educated, cannot always distinguish the sane from the insane. Now, it was willingness of the hospital to admit sane people as insane, and it is a false positive diagnosis because of the greater willingness to misdiagnose. Either way, it is still proof that perception and discernment is not level-headed. It's also proof that you can be easily misled. So let me make my point, which is today's message. The psychologist from Stanford University proved that manipulation is easy. So if you're wondering why the world is the way it is, this was a very important experiment. Not only for those who are mentally ill and diagnosed with it, but for everyone listening today. You see, manipulation is easy when you use the right words and actions. We have all been victims of it at some time, and honestly, we have even maybe instigated it, maybe some unknowingly. But it is a human trait, and some people misuse it, which makes me ask you, why do you think so many people misunderstand Christ and are biblically illiterate? Now, is it easy for you to say they don't have discernment, lack of understanding, misinterpretation? Maybe it's the wrong words or actions. Maybe not enough church. Maybe it's religious manipulation. Well, maybe perhaps it's something that you might want to think about this week. Here is my thought. Maybe it's because people are too busy studying the pastor and the religion, but not the Bible. Maybe they're being manipulated. Maybe they're being misinterpreted. Maybe the Bible itself is being made to have lack of discernment, not because the Bible does, but because of the pastor. Now, I want to say up front that my pastor is a very good pastor, and I feel like he does a good job. But the truth is, it's very easy for you to misunderstand Christ when you're simply following the teacher. So maybe you need to be busy studying your Bible and maybe doing a little less following of Judas and a little more following of Jesus. It's just a thought. In the world where you could be anything, choose to be love. Love is the answer. If this resonated with you, please like and share my post. And thank you for your donations to my divine mission and for helping me to keep my messages alive. I'll see you next time.